Well, welcome everyone. It's good to be back with you after our Easter celebrations. In fact, I'm hearing great reports back from churches across the country, not only about the number of people that have engaged with your services, but the number of people that experience life change through your services with people accepting Christ. And it's just encouraging to see how many churches are really responding to this crisis. And as a result of that, I think really providing hope and encouragement, not only to your churches, but to the communities that your churches serve. And so, in fact, we're going to talk a little bit about that in today's conversation. Our focus today is really around a new strategy for a new normal that we're going to experience coming out of this coronavirus crisis. And if you're like me, you're even tired of hearing that phrase right now. But it is the reality of where we're living. And I really do think not only is it going to reshape who we are as a people and in our culture, but out of necessity, it's also going then to reshape our churches as well. So there are three focuses for today's conversation. We're going to be talking about the church's new reality post-coronavirus. Additionally, we're going to be redefining how we engage our mission as a church. And then finally, we're going to talk about, with that reshaping of our mission, what are the new strategies, the new ministry strategies we need to be engaging as churches in the new reality that we will be facing. So joining me today for the conversation, Amy Anderson, our Director of Consulting at the Unstuck Group, will be one of the co-panelists, and I'm actually handing off the hosting of today's conversation to my friend Sean Bublitz. Sean is not only a ministry consultant at the Unstuck Group, but he really is helping us drive some of the content strategy, including these webinars and our podcasting. And so, Sean, I'm grateful for you I guess being willing to take over the hosting today. Are you willing to do that? I don't even know if I asked.
No, that's great. I'm excited about it because I've seen some of what we're going to talk through today, and I think it's going to be really helpful. So I'm excited about today's conversation. And, you know, this isn't just a one-way conversation from us to everyone who's tuning in. It's a two-way conversation. And so throughout the duration of our talk today, everyone listening is going to have the opportunity to join via chat within Zoom. So if you've been with us before, you know how this works. If this is your first time, just down there at the bottom, there's that little chat button, and that'll open a window at the side of your screen. And you can comment throughout our conversation today. You can ask questions of us. Mark Meyer from our team is going to be grabbing some of those questions. We're going to answer some of those at the end of our webinar today. But he's going to be answering some in real time as well there. And then any of the questions that we're not able to get to, we're going to try to use those and post new content and send some answers in our follow-up that's coming your way tomorrow as well. So be a part of this conversation. This is a two-way conversation we're having today. You can also join us in the conversation in social media. Use Twitter, Facebook, hashtag #UnstuckChurch as part of the conversation. So if you hear something today that's worth sharing with the people who are following you or part of your social media engagement, please share that there. If you'd like to ask us a question, you can do that there as well. But we just want to have a broader conversation about the direction the church is headed, because it really seems like the world has experienced a significant shift just over the past month. It's been 4 or 5 weeks now, even though it feels like a lot longer than that. I heard somebody say March was a really long year. And because of that, it seems like the church is going to experience probably a significant shift also. So Tony, I know we surveyed just recently, last week, a lot of churches to learn how the pandemic specifically has impacted them. What did we learn from that information?
Yeah, so we actually, thank you. A number of you responded to the survey response request that we put out there, and actually over 500 churches responded over that very first week in April. So this was before Easter. And we had churches under 100, many churches under 100 respond, and actually several churches well over 10,000 respond as well. And it was interesting to start to get a sense of what churches of different sizes are experiencing as a result of the crisis that we've been through. Something that was encouraging to me, though, is really churches of all different sizes have made some necessary changes, I think, to respond. As an example, almost all churches now are using online services in some format. So here's how the data broke down. Only 5% now of churches have not shifted to an online option. The number of small churches has increased from under 30% to over 90% now. So I just want to really celebrate, especially those small churches that are tuning in today. I recognize, we all recognize that this was a big leap for some of your churches. And so it was really encouraging for me to see how many churches have made that shift over the last several weeks. Another learning from the conversation, and you've maybe started to pick up on this, maybe even in your own churches, that it's more people are actually appearing to engage with online services in this season than were physically attending churches before the coronavirus hit us. And so again, I find that to be encouraging as well. Here's some of the stats on that. Two of every three churches indicated online engagement is higher now than in-person attendance before the crisis began. And for those churches that reported either increases or decreases in engagement, the average change of all those churches was doubling engagement from attendance. So that to me is very encouraging. Here's where some of the challenges, though, from what the survey is telling us. Giving has decreased for the majority of churches. In fact, 58% of churches indicated that giving has gone down since the start of the crisis. And actually mega churches, those churches with more than 2,000 in average attendance, were more likely to report decreases in giving. So that's some of what the survey data showed us. We'll be sharing more information about some of those survey results. In fact, if you listen to this past week's podcast, we broke down a lot of those details, so you may want to go back and listen to that. But this is generally what I'm seeing is whatever changes we were experiencing as churches, whatever changes our culture was experiencing, and then how people were responding to our ministry strategies as churches before the crisis. What we're seeing after the crisis is that change is accelerating at a much more rapid pace. And I think forcing churches to really reevaluate not only what is our mission as a church, but then how do we move forward? How does our strategy have to change moving forward? In fact, culture, I think, has been moving at a much faster pace than the church in the past decade. And this crisis is forcing churches now to catch up.
Yeah, Amy, I know none of us can see into the future, but I do think we can make some logical assumptions and conclusions from just where we were and what Tony talked about. That's accelerating at a faster pace now. So what do you think the new reality will be for churches? What kind of shifts do you think are going to happen between now and when we're able to sort of gather back together again in some form?
Sure. We've been talking about this for weeks now, and I know a lot of our pastor friends have been talking about it too, so it's probably not new thoughts, but I think there's a general agreement we're going to see less in-person weekend attendance for some time, if not forever. There's going to be a continued fear of large gatherings. And let's be honest, people are getting very used to attending church online now. It's the way that they're experiencing it. And I think we're seeing more engagement because I think it's been a really positive experience for people. You know, we used to say that people went to church 1.9 times a month. Those were our regular attenders. That's probably not going to increase. It's going to probably decrease. So the second thing is, we've said it before, but I think engagement is the new measure, not attendance. I like what Carey Nieuwhof said today. He said churches are going to need to shift from counting viewers to counting engagers. So viewing is not the ultimate end goal, is that we want people to engage beyond just consuming that content and take a next step somehow in their faith. And so I think that's going to be some new language we're going to be using. And I think we're going to start to see some best practices emerge in the months to come about how people now in the comfort of their own home can try church again, right? They don't have to drive to a building. There's need out there right now. People are feeling grief and those types of things. They're finding their way to your services. And so how easy are we going to be able to make it so they can take a next step and really explore their faith? We used to have Bible studies and Sunday school and all that. I think all of those types of classes are going to come out in some new digital way, like in a good way, into courses that people can take where they can learn more and be a, kind of a self-guided study that they're going to go into. And lastly, I would say, I think a big change is going to be this need for more community presence, more involvement in the local community. I don't remember when we talked about this, but when we're online, we can reach people all over the world, right? But I think God really wants us to care for those people in our communities. Like, how can we get back out there and have a presence serving the people where God has placed our church? So those are some of my speculations, at least.
Yeah, that's really good. Tony, I've heard you say several times that you pray for interruptions for churches. Why is that?
Yeah, so first of all, I want to apologize for anything I had to do with this interruption, though. This is not the interruption I was praying for. And honestly, I've been praying for interruptions in churches. I also pray for this in my own life, because what I've seen in my own life is when I experience an interruption, it causes me to really reflect on, God, why are you trying to get my attention, and what's the next step I need to be taking? And really, for a similar reason, I've been praying that prayer for churches as well. In fact, I've written in the past, let me just read this. Interruptions jolt us. They upset our equilibrium. They force a reaction. Interruptions challenge us to pause and assess what's happening around us. And then they force us to build a plan to respond. And ultimately, interruptions provoke us to act in new ways. And my hope is that's what's going to happen as a result of what our churches are experiencing right now. But let me say this, and I want to be as pointed as possible. In fact, you may want to shut off the webinar after I share this. Unfortunately, they're talking about, will the economy be a V-shaped or U-shaped recovery? For churches, this is not going to be a V-shaped recovery. In fact, I'm doubtful it's going to be a U-shaped recovery. I think we're in for the long haul with this, because in big swaths of our country, especially on the coast and metropolitan areas, maybe not so much in middle America and rural areas, it's going to be some time until we are able to have large gatherings, including church services again. And more importantly, it's going to be a long time before people feel comfortable coming back to large gatherings after weeks and months of the health professionals telling us the best thing that you can do for your health and for the people that you love around you is to stay home. And so especially for older people in our congregations, especially those that are at higher risk, but even those that have family and friends that are in those categories, it's going to be a long time before people come back to physical gatherings in churches. And I've been encouraging church leaders, you shouldn't be planning on May coming and magically everything being back to normal. We need to be prepared for this to be a long marathon rather than a sprint. And as a result of that, I really think churches can't be waiting for the virus to get behind us before we can start thinking about how the church needs to look different moving forward. Yeah. We need to be making those types of changes now. We need to be considering what are the strategic shifts that we need to be making now as churches rather than waiting. Because if we wait, my fear is it's going to be way too late for the church to be able to engage with the needs that people have today and the shifts that our culture is going to be making today as a result of what we've experienced.
Yeah, that's right. Well, Amy, we've experienced a really significant interruption, but this past month has not been a seismic shift in why the church exists.
Right.
It's just forcing us to rethink, how do we accomplish that mission and live that mission out? So you've led several churches through this conversation before. Kind of set up that idea for us today.
Yeah, I think the disruption with our weekend services is the biggest disruption we could have felt, because I think a lot of our identity as churches was built into that large gathering. And I've shared this before, but when I worked at my church, I was over the weekend services. And I remember the time that I figured out that really our weekend service wasn't our church. Our weekend service was our main strategy to reach people and teach them about Jesus. And so when I saw it as a strategy, then I was able to assess the music. Is it helping us accomplish what we want to accomplish? Assess the teaching, assess anything about the room. And our church team, our leadership team, started to have conversations about using that term strategy, and it inspired a little bit. But I want to show you the pyramid that kind of we've taken from that inspiration as we work with churches. So I'm just going to share my screen if you don't mind, Sean.
Yeah, go ahead.
All right. It'll set up really the punchline for what we're trying to talk about here today. So this is we call it the strategic alignment pyramid. And I'm not going to talk through every layer in detail, but I want to get up to the strategy level here. But if you look at the very bottom levels, those bottom three are what we call the foundational levels. So these core beliefs here, core beliefs are those beliefs that the Bible is just really crystal clear on. It's the foundation of our faith. Foundations don't change. Pyramids are not built from the top down. They're built from the bottom up, right? So core beliefs, what we believe. Mission, we talk about that a lot. Mission defines why we exist, what we're called to do. And this third foundational level here is called making disciples. And that's really defining who we are becoming. Meaning if we believe what we believe and we've given a mission to reach people and make disciples, what ought people be looking like then? And, it really reflects typically the discipleship path. So, I'm going to live in God's grace, accept it, extend it to other people. I want to grow in my understanding of God. I want to do life with other people and in community, right? I want to understand my giftedness and use those gifts to serve a local body. And so however you define those core next steps in your discipleship path, this is all just foundational. And things below the foundation, they don't change. They are the foundation. This next level here is the directional layer. And directional, we would say the vision, that defines, right, where we're going as a church. When we sit down and we pray and we get before God and we say, what might our church look like 5 years from now if we do what you're calling us to do? That's the vision. The goals there is what success looks like for the organization. And so we talk about every year you've got to reset these goals tied to your vision for where you're going. And again, we're in the direction layer, right? We're setting direction for our church and for our teams. And then we get up to this level, which is organizational strategies. And for me, this is the punchline, where we're at today. We've got this foundation. The foundation in our church didn't change. Some of us have a vision for where we're going the next 3 to 5 years. If you don't have one, you should build that one next. We know what success looks like. But then we go, if we're going to do what we believe God is calling us to do, what are the core strategies right here that we need to be focusing on? And I think that's the language we need to talk about this now. Like I said, when I was talking about our weekend services, that was a strategy to accomplish our goals, which fed into our vision so that we could do what we believe God was calling us to do. And so I think as we talk about today's new reality, this is the opportunity for the church right now. It's these organizational strategies. What do we need to do differently now, given our new reality? And we need to use that language. And by the way, strategies are not foundational. They're not down here, right? They're up here. So they should change every once in a while. Mm-hmm. And we should be looking at how we're doing our ministry and checking it against these goals to say, is it actually effective? I remember our church did mid-size groups for years, and 300 people were locked and loaded, and they loved them. And then we made a strategy change to go to small groups. And we did that because we had 2,700 people who were not in community around the Bible anymore. People thought we were changing stuff down here, like we only cared about new people. The truth was we did a strategy change because we wanted everybody to be able to participate in those community groups.
Yeah, Amy, let me interrupt you, and I'm
Yeah.
sorry to do this, but I have so much passion about this particular topic. I can't hold back anymore. I want to emphasize what you just said. The number one reason why I've seen churches get stuck over the last 10 years of what I've been doing is because they put organizational strategies in that bottom level.
Yes.
And they think the way we do church, it can't change. It's because it's foundational.
Mm-hmm.
And so my fear, of course, in all of this in these last weeks is we still think we're going to be able to go back and do church the way we were doing church 2 months ago.
Mm-hmm.
And if we miss this right now, it's really going to impact what our churches are going to look like going forward, because the same strategies we used 2 months ago are not going to work in the months and the years to come. So I can't overemphasize enough what you just shared. I wish I could operate the magic marker like you just did as effectively, but thank you for highlighting that for us.
Yeah, what it really comes down to is the strategies. They're the hows of what we're doing. They're not the whys, they're not the definition. It's how we're doing it. And I think right now the church has an incredible opportunity to throw all those hows against a board and see which ones stick. How are we going to get people to engage, right? That new front door experience. How do we help them take a next step so that we all begin to look more like Jesus? And we're in the reinvention stage in a lot of ways. And so we look forward to helping churches discover that and to share those best practices. So that was a long answer, Sean, but there you go.
No, that's really good, Amy. And, some of the churches that I'm working with, even after this crisis started, we started to talk about, well, the mission hasn't changed, and our vision hasn't changed. That vision that we recently defined hasn't changed. Some of our organizational goals maybe, but now we need to take a look at our strategies again in light of our vision. I think that's the key conversation a lot of churches need to be having right now. So Tony, you started down this road, but how does this all apply to what the church is facing today?
Do you notice I have some passion about some of this stuff, Sean?
I've seen that before. Yeah.
Yeah. So it's going to change. There's no doubt about it. And I actually wrote about this in the article that we released today. I'm seeing two different types of pastors and church leaders right now. One type of pastor and church leader is asking me the question, when will we go back to doing church? When will we get to gather again in our church buildings and have Sunday services like we had Sunday services in the past? I think that's the wrong question to be asking right now. In fact, you probably don't want my answer, because whatever you think it is, it's probably far longer than you're anticipating it will be for those types of gatherings to come back. The second type of leader, though, is asking this question: how does this disruption need to change our vision, our strategy, our structure going forward? And those types of pastors and church leaders that are asking those questions, they're not waiting for a month from now, a couple months from now, to begin engaging that conversation and to start making changes. They're engaging that conversation right now. And so that's part of what I think we need to be looking at as leaders in the church is nobody's ready for this conversation. But if we're leaders, we need to start forcing this conversation. We need to start having this conversation. And related to that, I talked about in the article that released today, these 7 shifts that I think are going to be necessary for the church going forward. And I'm going to run through them real quick here. I share a little bit more in the article. You'll want to go read that. And Amy, I'm thinking maybe this is our podcast episode for next week, and we can just dive a little bit deeper into these shifts. But if you're taking notes, this is where you want to listen. The first shift is the obvious one, the shift from analog to digital. The catch here is we need to think beyond just online services on Sunday morning. We need to look at everything that we're doing and figuring out how do we make the shift from getting people physically connected at our church to delivering all of those resources, all of that content, and really encouraging people to take next steps in their faith by shifting to an online platform. The second shift is the shift from just teaching to equipping. And teaching is very important, and we need to continue to teach. But that is the strategy we used as a church in every context to help people take their next steps toward Christ in the past. And we're going to have to shift to more of an equipping mode to equip people to take their next steps toward Christ in their personal spiritual journeys, engaging spiritual disciplines, engaging scripture, and then living out what God's called them to do in their life on purpose. That is going to take more than teaching, and we're going to have to learn how to become equippers to do that. The third shift is the shift from gathering to connecting. And again, these are, it's stuff that we've been talking about at the Unstuck group for years, because what we've seen, and Dad actually supports this, research has supported this, is just keeping people busy in church activities, gathering people at events and in programs does not help people become like Jesus. But connecting people in life-changing relationships does, beginning, of course, with the relationship with Jesus, but then connecting people with other believers to help them take their next steps toward Christ, that works every time. The fourth shift is, and people aren't going to like this, but I just think this crisis has gotten us to this place where we have to be thinking about this more intentionally. We need to shift from a global perspective to a local perspective. And that sounds counterintuitive, probably from everything you've heard. But I'm just going to come out and say it. I think churches have, for way too long, spent a lot of money sending a lot of people on international missions trips, as an example, and instead have not done the hard work of figuring out how to reach their mission field, the people right around their church who are not in church and don't have a faith with Jesus. And that's the shift that needs to be made. And honestly, and by the way, I've been on global mission trips. My sister was a long-term missionary to Cambodia, so I love missionaries. That's not what this is about. But from my perspective, it's a lot easier to get on a plane and engage missions in Africa than it is to engage our mission field around our churches. And we need to be more intentional about that. So that's another shift. Another shift that we need to make is from complex to being simple. Excuse me. And what we've seen is this crisis has forced it. Churches can't do everything they used to do in the past. And so now this is our opportunity, and we need to take advantage of it, because what we've seen at the Unstuck group is the churches that have a real focused strategy to reach people, to engage people, and to help them take next steps. Those churches are having a significant kingdom impact. The sixth shift is from honestly being bloated and how we spend money to being much more frugal. And being more frugal is going to allow us to be more generous too. And that's where churches need to get to. And pointedly, the key area where this shift needs to happen is with staffing. Now, it's going to sound like I'm talking out of both sides of my mouth, because I actually think we're going to need a different staffing structure and a different type of staff team in order to engage the new strategies that the church needs to engage. But what we saw even before the crisis, churches that were in decline, churches that were stuck, had 35% more staff than healthy, thriving churches. Did you hear that? Mm-hmm. Churches that were in decline, churches that were stuck, had 35% more staff than healthy, thriving churches. And so that's just one area where churches are going to have to get more frugal so that they can be more generous and have a greater impact with their ministry strategy. The last shift is the one Amy alluded to earlier. We are going to, as a church, have to shift from measuring attendees, and in this season, measuring viewers, to measuring engagement. And by that, I mean not just measuring the people that show up, either in our services or at our events or online, to actually monitoring, knowing who it is that is engaging with our church, with our ministry, with our discipleship strategy, and helping more and more and more people take those next steps toward Christ. And so this is not an excuse to not look at attendance, not look at how many people are viewing our services, but we have to get to a place now, rather than just looking at who showed up, who are we really engaging with? Who do we really have relationship with? And how are those people taking their next steps toward Christ? Those are some of the key shifts that need to happen. Again, Amy and I will unpack all of that a little bit more in this coming week's podcast. But let me just say this point blank. The church has been given an amazing permission to make these changes, to actually engage these shifts. You have permission now to actually engage these types of changes that will be required for your church to have more impact going forward and for your church to thrive going forward.
Yeah, that's so good. I was thinking, if there's any silver lining to all that's going on here for churches, it's this: in the past, we may have put an inordinate amount of focus on attendance within our churches, and now, just because of the nature of what's happening, we really don't know what attendance is. I mean, we're all really just guessing at the end of the day, right? What we can measure are those engagement points, those steps people are taking. And those are the environments where we're expecting that people have an opportunity to grow as disciples even greater than they could if they were in a weekend service or one of those places we would count attendance, right?
So yeah. And Emily and I are actually, I need laughter right now. I'm sure you all do. And so Emily and I have been going through every episode of The Big Bang Theory. And I think was it Tiffany on our team that shared a quote from Amy Farrah Fowler is one of the characters on The Big Bang Theory. I think she's a neurosurgeon. And she said something along the lines of, I can grasp the fact that there's actually a deity. I just can't reconcile the fact that he takes attendance. And I'm just thinking, what a brilliant statement, and actually something that we as church leaders need to hear in this season as well.
That's good. So Tony, what are some of the current realities that churches need to think through when they're designing these new strategies to reach and disciple people here in the future?
Yeah, so I alluded to some of these in my last response, but maybe let me get a little bit more practical here. The obvious one, again, is we need to prioritize our digital strategy. Every minute, it's way too late for ministries to be considering this, but this is the opportunity. This is the season where we need to make some investment here. And again, in a moment, I'm going to talk about the fact that many of our churches, and I mentioned this earlier, are going to be operating with less money going forward. But in this area, most churches are going to have to invest more money and hire more staff in order to engage this digital strategy going forward. And so it's going to require a shift. We can't continue to look at our platform only being the pulpit on Sunday morning. Those days are far behind us. The second thing here is we're going to be doing ministry with less money for the foreseeable future. It was 60% of churches have seen a decrease in giving. By the way, just as a side note, there were a handful of churches that have actually seen an increase in giving in the last several weeks. Your churches may be some of those churches that are watching today. And what I'm hearing from those churches that have seen increase is they think the reason why people have been even more generous during the season is the fact that the church is being more generous in this season as well. And they're actually engaging with community partners to try to serve their communities during this season. And as a result of that, what a great reflection of the mission God's called us to as churches. People in the church are giving more than to those churches. So that may be something for you to be thinking about. But as a result of us having less money, we're going to have to figure out how to be less complex in our programming, in our ministry programming, and we're probably going to have to make the necessary shift, I hope we do, from staff doing all the ministry to engaging volunteers, gifted volunteers to do the ministry.
Mm-hmm.
Another impact that we're going to have here is we're going to have to, within our discipleship strategy, move beyond the classroom and frankly, even beyond the living room. And we're going to have to figure out, how do we help people, resource people to engage God's word personally, to engage spiritual disciplines, and to live out the life mission God's called them to without being in a classroom at the church, and even beyond being in a small group setting. Now, small groups are very important. I actually met with my small group again last night, but my small group leader can't help me take my next step toward Christ unless I am personally engaging God's word, engaging spiritual disciplines, living out the life mission God's called me to, trying to influence the lives of people around me that God's put into my life. We have to help people make that shift. And what I love about what we're facing right now is the classroom is not an option. So we're going to have to figure out, at least in this season, how our spiritual formation strategies need to shift. And my prayer is, whatever we learn in this season, that as churches, we'll continue to live that out going forward. Fewer programs at churches. We've talked about a shift in maybe how we approach missions, for that to be less global and more local. But let me conclude, Sean, with this thought when it comes to specific strategy shifts that we're going to need to make. Leadership needs to get younger in churches. In fact, we're already seeing this even in the season. Some of the leadership teams that we're working with at churches, they're unwilling to engage using virtual video conferencing. Mm-hmm. And mainly it's because it's a bunch of old people. And if nothing else during this crisis, what we're seeing is young adults, young leaders, they're responding more effectively to what we're facing than those of us that are a little bit more seasoned in life and leadership. And I think it's just a great reflection of, we need to find those young leaders in our churches that love Jesus, they're mature in their faith, they're gifted leaders, but we need to add some of that young leadership to our staff teams and to our leadership teams in order for us to be able to move forward as churches, because this crisis is forcing us again to look at our strategies differently in our churches. And I really think some of those new insights, those new ideas, how churches can be more effective, is going to come from younger leaders in our churches.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. Amy, anything that you would add to that?
Well, I would just, echo Tony, getting some of the younger leaders in your church around the creative tables. Tony, you just said a few minutes ago, we have this amazing opportunity to reinvent ourselves through new strategies. And younger people, they've grown up with all this technology. They understand how it works. They would have ideas that would never even occur to Tony or I, honestly. And so I echo that. Mm-hmm. I think the only other thing I'd add is, I probably say this all the time, but you have to get to know your mission field. As you're setting up your new reality, where did God place your church? Who lives there? What are their needs? And then you need to design strategies that will reach and disciple the people who are in your community. Mm-hmm. And so maybe it even just sounds so, of course we need to do that, but a lot of churches miss that step. We assume we know who's in our community, and we've got to get really good at that.
Yeah, that's really good. One thing I would add to this, just as far as, new realities, I've talked to several pastors in the last couple of weeks who they've either been doing a renovation on their facility, or they've built a new facility in the last year or so, and they're already anticipating a challenge with being able to fill that facility in the future. And they've got this new reality they just didn't plan for. And I think part of what church leaders are going to need to think through is, how do we shift how we were thinking about and using our facility in the future to serve our community better, to be more effective at reaching people and discipleship, when maybe the majority of people aren't going to come back and be in one physical location again. So I think that's another reality that, 5-6 weeks ago, we never would have thought we would be dealing with that. We were planning to build bigger buildings and have bigger spaces. Tony, what are you hearing from some of the pastors as they're considering this new reality that we've moved into?
Yeah, so I alluded to this earlier, but let me just restate. A lot of leaders are still trying to guess, when are we going to get back to normal? And I was there up until probably a week, 10 days ago. And then I realized this is not healthy. This is not a good way for me to be approaching life, and certainly not to be approaching leadership. And rather than asking, when are we going to go back? I need to start looking at, what is the opportunity that God's presenting to us? What are the next steps that I need to be engaging in my life and in my leadership? And, part of my fear in this is that actually we will get back too soon to what the old way of doing church, rather than learning what we can in this season and then actually growing from that, actually taking the necessary next steps that we need to take. And like I said, we're seeing this. The more progressive churches that we're working with right now. In fact, I had a great church. The second week that they were closed down, they said, we're not stopping the process with the Unstuck group. We're gonna shift it all to video, and we're gonna make it happen. And the more progressive churches are really leaning into those options so that they can have the conversation right now, because they realize if we don't take advantage of what we're learning right now, we're going to be missing out on the great impact that God could have through our church with the necessary changes that we need to make. Here's what I do know. Before the crisis, we surveyed, I think it's close to 15,000 churches now. And those 15,000 churches told us, we didn't tell them, they told us that they were either in plateau or in decline as churches. 80% of churches in plateau or decline. And again, what I know is this crisis is going to accelerate that. And so now is the opportunity for churches to reassess, what is the mission that God has called us to? What's the vision for where he's calling us to go into the future? And then the area where I'm convinced just about every church is going to have to make changes and what's our strategy going to be to accomplish that? There are going to be changes, and the progressive, healthy, thriving churches are going to take advantage of this opportunity right now. So with that, I know there's a lot of questions coming in, and we want to respond to as many of those questions as possible. But before we turn to Q&A, in fact, Sean, are you okay if I let you ask the questions this time so that I can maybe respond to some of these?
I think that'd be great.
Before we jump to that, I want you to know the Unstuck group, we've always wanted to help churches like yours really get your head wrapped around those three questions that I just rattled off. Why do we exist as a church? Where is God calling us to go into the future? And how are we going to get there? And again, I really think in this season, that third question, every church has to wrestle with that question. And that's going to force you to rethink, what's our strategy? How are we going to engage the mission and the vision God's called us to? And then out of necessity, if you start shifting your strategy, you're also going to have to take a look at your structure. How do we staff for this new strategy? How do we engage volunteers in a new way? You're going to have to look at that. And that's why, even in this season, Sean, I think you mentioned we got a call from a church in the UK. Is that
Absolutely.
true?
Yeah.
So yeah, we're hearing from churches throughout the world now. Can you help us while we're still locked down? Can you help us try to get our head wrapped around what the church looks like going forward? And the answer to that is yes. We do have virtual options to walk you through this process that I was just describing. And if you want to learn more about that, just go to the unstuckgroup.com, and there's a way for you to connect with us. And then let's at least have the conversation. That's free. And if we can come alongside you in this season, we really want to be able to do that. And I think in the long run, not only is that going to help you get clarity around strategy and structure, but we recognize you're going to have to learn how to do ministry, spending less money going forward. Mm-hmm. And so we want to help you get more frugal so your church can get more generous in the long run as well.
Absolutely.
Sean, with that, are you ready to jump into Q&A?
I'm ready, Tony, and we've got some great questions, but I want to start with just a quick follow-up to kind of where you wrapped up at. I was thinking, I've heard from a lot of pastors that when everything shifted online, all of a sudden they saw these online views dramatically increase. Some churches are saying they doubled or tripled whatever would be their weekend attendance in views on the weekend, and I think a lot were energized and celebrating that. But I was just wondering, based off of what you wrapped us up with, do you think that there's any danger for pastors and for leaders as they celebrate those views? I've heard some conversation about churches are growing again, but you talked about even more churches being in decline in the future. Is there a danger of sort of a false reality because we really don't know how to measure those views and whether that means we're growing or not?
Yeah, that's a great question. I've actually gotten flack from both sides of the spectrum on this question in the past, because some people have said, oh, Tony's just about church growth. The reality is I'm about church health, but when the church gets healthy, I want it to grow. And so in this season, and I actually think for the foreseeable future, it's not as much about growth. It's about the number of people we're engaging and the number of new people that are not only becoming believers in Jesus, but getting on mission with the body of Christ as well. And so, you do, whenever we do get back to gatherings, you do need to measure attendance. And in this season, you do need to measure viewers, but we better quickly get to the place where we are learning how to actually engage with the people that are watching and figuring out how to help those people take their next steps. Otherwise, the viewers are not going to be part of our discipleship strategy. They're not going to be taking next steps toward Christ. And as a result of that, we may miss the opportunity. And as a result of that, be celebrating because lots of people are watching, like the over 900 people watching this right now. That's not the win, is to get 900 people watching this webinar. The win is to get 900 churches making the necessary changes that are required for their church to have a greater impact. And likewise, for churches, it's not how many people are viewing our services on Sunday. It's how many people are giving their lives to Jesus and actually getting on mission for him.
Yeah, that's really good. Amy, over the last several weeks, churches have had to pivot quickly, and they've been creating a lot of new opportunities for people to engage in ministry, all of it being digitally right now. What are some of the things that we've started doing over the last several weeks that you think will stick over the long term versus some of those things that may just be temporary to get us through this season of the crisis?
Well, I'm not a futurist, so maybe we should ask Tony this one, because he thinks
Not
about
either,
these
I don't
things.
think.
I think about some of the things like specifically the small group strategy. I think you mentioned you connecting with your group online. What of those kinds of things may carry us into the future, and what might just be temporary fixes for now?
Yeah, I think the whole digital platform of helping people take their first next steps digitally, whether it's taking in our service, I think we're going to see the invention of some ways new people who want to explore their faith before they go to a building, if they ever go to a building, Zoom room type of things, groups that can gather and ask questions versus going to a building or a starting point class or whatnot. I think things like that are here to stay. I do think online small groups, I think video right now, it's all video. I could see groups supplementing the video going forward. I think they found the value in continuing to meet, but I think we'll get a little bit back to some people still gathering in homes for the friendship side and the connection side. I don't know. That's all I got on that one. I'm sorry.
Oh, that's good. Tony, any thoughts? What would you add to that?
Yeah, I just alluded to, everything that we do as a church, every group that we connect with, we need to figure out how to make that, have a digital strategy to support that.
Yeah.
So from beginning to end, from pre-connection to our churches, really, questions about faith, questions about how to connect with other people, before they're even thinking probably about engaging with one of our services. Those are some things that churches need to be better positioned with their digital strategy to respond to that. But then even after people connect to our churches and connect to others, how are we equipping people with the tools so that they can be on a journey, a spiritual journey that we're resourcing rather than spoon feeding.
Mm-hmm. That's good. Tony, this question for you: what are the most successful ways that people, that churches are having in driving online viewers towards that engagement? How are they getting people? Once they view the service, what are the steps to get them to engage beyond that? Maybe what's engagement look like?
Yeah, so I don't know. We're all learning this together, but you need to start thinking about. And so we were seeing some great changes as far as churches looking at Sunday morning services when they were in person in your buildings, of the language we were using because we were expecting guests, and then the simple, easy next steps that we were encouraging people to take when we were gathering physically. And I would just challenge you, you need to have a similar strategy for your online experiences as well. You need to pay attention to the language that you're using as you're engaging people online. You need to make available very easy, simple next steps for guests to connect with you, and really map out almost the term I hate, despise, is an assimilation process. I prefer kind of a connection process to engage with guests and to encourage them to take first steps. Ultimately, we still know that it's going to have to be into a relationship with other people, helping them live out, engage in spiritual disciplines, helping them serve others, helping them find their life purpose, all of those things that are a part of every church's discipleship strategy, or should be. We're going to help them get on that path eventually, but we need to have a strategy for the guests when they're showing up to our online services to help them take those easy first steps.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Amy, let me ask you then, there was another question that came in just in regards to first-time guests. Have you seen any best practices in what churches are doing to welcome those first-time guests in the digital environment and then to sort of connect with them after they view the service?
I again, learning with you, I've talked to pastors what they're trying. There's no way to tell what has been a best practice yet, but getting somehow for them to submit a minimal level of information and having a personal follow-up, whether that be through email or some other way, that seems to be the loop. They make themselves known and we connect a personal follow-up somehow. But I haven't, again, we're still emerging in all this. I haven't seen it, but I look forward to sharing it as we see it emerge.
Yeah,
sure.
Churches
are using texting to make those initial connections. I saw a church that's actually, my ministry before all of this happened was serving as a volunteer in an environment for new people to connect after the service in a space, a physical space. And I heard a church actually testing with Zoom, I think it was, kind of a post-gathering for people that had questions or that were new to the church.
Well, that's fantastic.
To kind of recreate that same type of environment. So I thought that was a great idea as well.
Mm-hmm. I think this may be just a short-term solution, but I think just the old phone call right now is an amazing strategy. Again, all of a sudden people love just getting a phone call. There are a lot more people than used to be that will pick up the phone and answer that. And I think from churches that we've heard that are doing that, those people feel a great sense of care that my church would reach out during the week and just check in on me. Or for those new people, they're more apt to pick up the phone when you call. So yeah, that might be a short-term strategy.
Can I make one random comment after going to church on my computer for the past 4 or 5 weeks? I don't know the technology, but I challenge churches to be able to get into Roku or some other different platform so people can actually watch the service on TV.
Yeah,
for what that's worth. That's probably really basic, but I'd love to actually watch it with my husband sometime, but we're both sitting on our individual computers taking services in right now. So
for myself, we have kids at home, and we watch the service online through our TV, through the Roku, but our kids' content isn't there. And so it's very difficult for us to get our kids' content on screen and try to get 5 kids around an iPad to watch a church service.
Yeah, I'm getting lots of advice though in the chat on how I can do this. So thank you.
Fantastic.
I need
that's
some
why
young
we do
leaders
this,
in my
right?
life.
That's why we do this. Tony,
That's awesome.
let's talk about the multi-site church just for a second, because the multi-site church, this is certainly a very different thing for those churches as well. All of those churches now find themselves really meeting in one place, which is online as a multi-site church. So just a couple of questions there. What is that next step process for newer people connecting the church look like in the multi-site church? How do you filter that down maybe to a specific campus? One of the questions here was just kind of generally what's different for multi-site churches in this new environment.
Yeah, that's a great question. And I'm going to flip it to Amy in a second, because she's married to a guy that's part of a multi-site church. So maybe she has some insights that I don't. But I actually think this is a helpful season for multi-site churches, because if you truly are multi-site, you are one church and multiple locations. And unfortunately, some of the biggest challenge that the Unstuck group found it with multi-site churches before the crisis is they weren't really operating as one church.
Right.
They were multiple churches with one name, maybe. In some cases, not even the same name, but they really weren't the same church with the same strategy. And so, if anything, I hope that this season helps you to make sure that you are really unified about who you're trying to reach, how you're reaching them, how you're encouraging people to take next steps. You need to be unified as a church. Then, I mean, eventually we will be meeting in our locations again. The question is when that's going to happen, but it will happen sometime in the future. And so as you're engaging with people, connecting with people now, eventually you're going to want to find out, where do you live, so that we can connect you to the location that's closest to you. So now, of course, that's not a priority, but eventually you're going to want to ask that question so that you can help them make a personal connection. Amy, do you have any additional thoughts there?
No, I will say that that's what our church experienced, which wherever the autonomy maybe was in the past, it's getting more identical as we're moving through this change. The only thing I think that multi-site's advantage maybe that they have, again, is that they've got more people to redeploy to put energy towards these new strategies and the new things that we're going to try. So that it's a helpful season for multi-sites, because they aren't opening up doors at 5 or 6 locations. They can use those folks to help design new ideas.
Yeah, absolutely. So we're almost out of time, but we've got some more good questions that I'd like to keep going on for a little bit longer. Is that okay with you, Amy and Tony?
Absolutely.
Okay, so here's what we're going to do. I'm going to go ahead and wrap up. And for those of you on the webinar who need to go ahead and leave, you're welcome to do that. Just know we're going to hang on here for several more minutes and go through a few more of these questions. But if you registered for the webinar today, you'll be getting an email from us with a link to all the resources that we talked about in today's webinar. That should be coming your way tomorrow morning. So if you've had questions in the chat about, how can I get access to this, or where do I see that? A lot of that will be coming in the email to you tomorrow. We're also going to try to follow up on the questions that we weren't able to get to today. We'll answer some of those in follow-up content and in other ways. So please feel free, if others come up, other things come to mind, submit those to us. You can do that by asking the question on social media and hashtagging it UnstuckChurch, or you can send us an email at help@theunstuckgroup.com. And as always, if we can do anything to serve your church and to help you as you take your next steps into whatever this new normal is going to be for us, we'd love to talk to you about that. You can connect with us at theunstuckgroup.com. So if you need to go ahead and sign off, thanks so much for joining us. We'll see you again at some point in the future. If you can hang on, we're going to answer a few more questions. So Amy, I want to come back to you, and then maybe Tony, if you have any thoughts, you can follow up on this as well. There have been a lot of questions about children's ministry and the effect on children's ministry in churches with all that's going on. So a couple of different questions. One, what maybe are some best practices of what kids ministry can look like in this season while we're all online and doing things digitally? And then there were some specific questions about what may it look like when we are able to gather together again in some form. And what kind of effect is all that's going on going to have on our kids ministry? So any thoughts on that?
Well, I'm going to do what Tony does. Sean, You have 5 kids at home right now.
I do.
That's what I was thinking. I'm glad you played that way, Amy, because I was thinking the same thing. Sean's the expert on this.
Sean, what do you think?
Well, this is where I go grab my wife and have her come in and answer the questions. Yeah. So, I think for us, and we've talked about this a little bit, let me start with the digital engagement and then what this might mean for us in the future. My kids love on Sunday mornings, our church posted the videos to the curriculum online, and we watch those together, and they're age specific. And so we watch the videos for my 5-year-old, and then we watch the videos for my 8 and 10-year-old, and then we watch the videos for my junior higher. And we're able to have conversation about those. Each of those videos lasts 12 to 15 minutes, has some specific discussion questions at the end. And it's really helpful for us because what I've realized over the last several weeks is that in the churches that I worked in, we were constantly having conversations about how do we equip parents to be spiritual leaders for their kids. And I think what too often we found was parents brought their kids to church and dropped them off and hoped all the spiritual learning that needed to happen would happen there. Now parents have been forced into being the spiritual educator or guide for their children because there really is no one else. And so I think the church has a great opportunity to come alongside and partner with parents and resource them, to give them coaching, to provide them help as they're leading their kids at home right now spiritually. So I think any way that you can think through as a church doing that, honestly, I would, as a parent, appreciate just some one-on-one coaching with my church, or, maybe a Zoom call, a webinar like this, where they're helping me get some ideas of how I can be instilling into my kids some of these things. That I'd find huge value in that. So that's a bit about the digital strategy. Thinking about the future, I think churches are really going to have to look to the school systems and what's happening in their local schools with kids to get a sense of how do we engage, or how are we going to engage when we're able to gather together again to some point. We're seeing some school systems around the world open back up right now. And I know they're not identical to those school systems in the US, but you look at Denmark, you look at South Korea, and there are some pretty stringent social distancing guidelines for those schools where they can only have 10 kids in a classroom, and it affects their eating areas, and it affects their recess, and it affects a lot of things. If someone in the home has been diagnosed with COVID, the kid's not allowed to come to school. Those things are all going to have implications for our churches, and our churches are probably going to need to reflect very similar to how our schools look, I think, because parents are not going to be comfortable. They weren't comfortable with this before, and some of our churches had safety issues in our kids' areas. They are not going to be comfortable bringing their kids back to an environment where they think it may be unhealthy for them. So we're going to have to over communicate in those areas and look to our local government leaders and school systems to be really prepared for that. As a parent, I want to make sure that my church and any environment I put my kid in is doing absolutely everything they can to make sure that's a safe environment. So thanks for pushing that back to me. Do you guys have any other thoughts on that?
That's great. Yeah. By the way, not to be an alarmist, but the college presidents got together, I think just in the last couple of days, and basically said, if we're not having school in the fall, we're not having college football in the fall. So like, if they're having that conversation, this is going to last a while.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
So we need to be prepared for that.
Yeah, I don't want to be an alarmist either, but my wife and I are mentally preparing for our kids not going back to school in the fall.
Yeah.
I know our local school system. They're wonderful, but I'm not sure how they can prepare for all of those changes by August. That would be
I'm trying to figure out, what am I going to do without college football?
It's a good question. Yeah. All right. So let's get to a few other questions. Tony, for you, what online metrics or analytics are best to measure what really matters, and not just, activity, not just views at the end of the day?
Yeah, it would be very similar to what we were measuring beyond attendance. So we're starting to monitor how many new guests are showing up. And again, it was challenging to figure that out when people were attending in person, and it's going to be challenging to figure that out online as well. But you need to be making sure new people are showing up. I mean, that's the only way for us to spread the gospel is for us to be able to increase the number of new people where we're sharing the gospel. Then what are the steps people are taking? Are people taking steps into groups? Are they taking steps into our discipleship strategy? Are they engaging in some sort of serving capacity? All of those things that we would talk about in the past still apply. How they get lived out will probably look different going forward. Even giving. I mean, giving is a great measure of where people are spiritually. And so there are still things that we can monitor to make sure that not only are we measuring the people that are showing up, but people are actually taking steps. And I think we're going to find it may actually be easier for us to monitor some of these steps people are taking if we're really leaning into a digital strategy to track where people are going in their spiritual journeys.
Yeah. Amy, this is a great question for you. Is there a new staff role or strategic position for a church team that might be needed in this new reality?
Yes. In fact, that's one of the areas that I've been thinking about and spending a lot of time on right now, because I think new staff roles, how we deploy digitally and how we almost treat that like a campus to how we gathered before. Does that make sense? Someone's got to oversee those experiences. So that's actually some content I'm hoping to put out here in the next couple of months, is what we're learning as far as staff redeployment. But yes, I think when this whole area of digital, and remember Ken Meyer a couple of webinars ago said your website is your new facility. We need some new leaders to make sure that we are providing a really good, if I can call it, brand experience as new guests come to our website, as they engage with us digitally. But I don't have a firm grasp on what those roles are yet, other than I believe it's going to lean towards a larger digital team. You know, we think about our communications team in the past, and print, web, media, website, all of that. A team like that is going to have to be expanded. Video is going to have to be expanded. So on that creative side of how we project out into our community, we're going to need to get really good at that.
Yeah, and let me just, I'm just reflecting on even how our team at the Unstuck group is structured. There are 11 of us that are on staff, and then a couple dozen people that we work with to help engage with churches separate from that. But on our staff team, about half our team is dedicated to creating content in our digital strategy and how we're engaging with the new people that are connecting with us. And in fact, that may be some of the staffing structure you want to think about for your digital strategy, is who owns the content, who actually delivers it in the digital format that it needs to be delivered, and then who's paying attention to who is connecting with you and how people are connecting with you and encouraging next steps. For us, it looks like who's connecting with us and how are they connecting with us, and how can we eventually serve that leader and serve that church. For you, it's going to be more about who's engaging with us, who's connecting with us, and how can we help them connect with our church and take their next steps toward Christ. But you're going to need my guess is that team doesn't exist in most of your churches. And those are the types of roles that you're going to need going forward.
Yeah. Tony, do you have any thoughts on facility use in the future? I think a lot of leaders are worried about having large spaces, large parts of their facility that they can't really utilize effectively anymore, because we just don't have that number of people that are coming back in person. Any thoughts on what we could do to maximize or use that space at all?
Yeah, well, this is a trend that we've seen for many, many years, actually. And I don't know, somebody that knows church buildings better than I do could probably pinpoint when churches building bigger buildings and just getting more people to come to a building when that season ended for the church, but it ended. It's not with us anymore. And so if anything, I think this is going to fuel two things. Number one, more churches engaging in a multi-site strategy where they're able to build more smaller buildings faster, cheaper, and actually get ministry closer to the people that they're trying to reach in their mission field. And then frankly, there are going to be a lot of churches that are not going to survive this financially.
Mm-hmm.
And the only way that they're going to be able to extend their mission as a local body of believers is to merge with other churches. And I think the wave of mergers that we're going to see in the coming months and years is going to astound a lot of people.
Mm-hmm.
And it's going to be really, hopefully, redeploying kingdom assets in a way that helps us as a church, again, get ministry closer to the people in our mission fields that we're trying to reach. But the days of building bigger buildings and trying to get everybody gathered in one service or at least in one location, those days are long behind us.
Yeah, I read a Wall Street Journal article recently that quoted some research that had been done, and they said there are about 350,000 churches in America, which I've heard that number before. But they said over half of those churches have 65 attenders or less within their church. And I think we're going to see a lot of those churches that they do struggle to make it through the season. They're not prepared financially, and they're probably not prepared digitally to continue doing church when everyone's stuck at home like we are right now.
Yeah, and unfortunately, in a lot of those churches, Sean, our sense is that it's a much older congregation too.
Right.
And so again, the challenge of this particular crisis is it's going to be some time before those congregations are able to come back together.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Amy, we've heard government leaders refer often to essential workers or essential travel. What are three things that you would say are essential to the church moving forward? Or maybe not three, maybe just a couple.
What's essential to the church moving forward? Meaning,
that's right.
Like today.
What are the essentials? Yeah, what are the essentials for us as we move into this next season of ministry?
I'll answer that because Amy answered it already today. Looking at the pyramid, the essentials are those bottom three levels of the pyramid. So the things, the why we exist question, the who we're becoming as disciples question, our doctrine, our beliefs. Those are the essentials.
Mm-hmm.
And everything above that is important. It's critical, but it's not the essentials. And that, I think that's where we've gotten hung up as churches is we think the way we do church is essential. It's not essential.
So good.
Accomplishing the mission is essential.
There's one sunny side that I've seen. I woke up, I don't know, maybe a week ago, and I said to my husband, I think maybe one of the things God can do through this is that I think our churches just kind of nipped and tucked for a while. Little change here, little change there, because we didn't want to disrupt any of these things up here. And I think God took away our biggest strategy that we invested so much time, effort in so that we could, well, I don't think he did it so that we're doing this, but I think it's one of the redeeming points is that we get to get back to what you just called on this foundational side. And as we've been talking about the whole time, rethink the how to reach a new generation. Because the truth is, anyone a Seth Godin fan?
Definitely.
He talks about when you're a big fan, you sneeze, and it's like you're the sneezers. People are telling you about all the things you should be doing. I like that marketing when I was at my church, we wanted our attenders to be sneezers for church, to invite people to church and all of this. And I just haven't seen that enthusiasm, at least in my community for church. They could be invited, but just people had no interest anymore. And so I'm just hoping some of our local churches here in the Twin Cities try some new things because our communities need the Lord. So.
Yeah.
So I think that's a good place to end. And actually, I'm going to reward everybody that stayed because I want to pray for you. So let me pray for you all, and then we'll wrap things up today. Lord, I'm grateful for these leaders that are listening in, that are watching today. Not only do they love you, but they love the mission that you've called them to. They love your local church, and your local church is still the hope of this world. And so, Lord, protect it. I pray that you would help us to be open to the necessary changes that will be required for us to continue to spread the gospel going forward. I pray, Lord, that people would be drawn to your church, that they would experience the love that only you can provide through the people that love you. And that, Lord, this would be really a revival occurring throughout our communities as people turn their hearts, their lives toward you, and recognize that you are their only hope. You are their only savior. You're the only one that could give purpose to our lives. I pray, Lord, that people's lives would be transformed because churches have transformed through this. Continue to protect the leaders that are watching, protect their ministries, protect their families. And Lord, I just pray that you would allow your church to thrive in the coming days and months ahead. We love you and pray this in the name of Jesus. Amen.
Amen.
Thanks for joining us, everybody.